Although there were divisions, one thing that I always kept coming back to in my research is how it never led to schism. And so when you look at other immigrant groups such as the Mennonites, and you look at the Ukrainians and other immigrants to Canada and the United States, often in the history of several Orthodox churches, and especially in American Catholicism, there's this issue of trusteeism, which is division caused by lay challenges to church boards and clerical authority, and it leads to schism. But throughout the period that I study, up into the late 90s, although there are divisions based in class and in the timing of immigration, the experiences that they had in Egypt as the society became much more polarized along religious lines, we don't encounter that same thing with the Copts. We don't encounter schism.
Welcome to Coffee with Bishop Suriel, a podcast for all things Coptic. This is a conversation about authentic Christian faith, Coptic history, patristic writings, the family, arts and music, religious education, youth matters, evangelism, and much more. Bishop Suriel likes his coffee like he likes his conversation, light, sweet, and scorching. We'll be joined by an array of guests who'll share their experiences, their backgrounds, and their insights to bring about an exciting discussion, and we hope you agree. Enjoy the podcast, and please welcome our host, Bishop Suriel. As we're joined by Dr. Candice Lukasic and Dr. Michael Ekledios in an episode titled Coptic Immigration to the United States, here's His Grace and our special guests. Your Grace?
Irini Pasi, peace be with you. Welcome back to episode 13 of the podcast, and today we are discussing an interesting subject, and that is Coptic immigration to the United States. My two guests today are two Coptic Orthodox scholars who have recently graduated from their PhD programs, and they are Dr. Candice Lukasic and Dr. Michael Ekledios. Welcome to both of you, and first of all, congratulations on this very fine achievement. I'm sure you are both relieved, and please tell us about your experiences of going through your respective PhDs and your feelings after graduation. Also, I hope you have your coffee and you are ready for some stimulating conversations. And I know that both of you have some interesting coffee mugs. We'd love to see them and tell us a little bit about them.
Okay, I guess I'll start. I got this actually 2 summers ago when there was the conference on Copts and modernity in Melbourne, Australia, where I saw you, I think, last, Sayedna, and it was a great conference, and I was able to pick up great souvenirs like this.
That's wonderful. So what's on the coffee mug? Tell us a little bit about it.
It's really just Australia, a crocodile, which I love, but also koalas, which are my favorite. That was one of the highlights of that trip, aside from the conference, and the delicious food of Melbourne as well.
So what was your favorite meal in Melbourne, Australia?
Oh, that's quite hard to measure. Every breakfast was a 5-star breakfast, really. And the meals at the conference, can I tell you, probably the best conference meals I've ever had. So great organization, Sayedna.
Thank you. Well, when I always hold these symposia, we always try to make sure that all of our guests and speakers are comfortable and happy, and it was a wonderful occasion. So tell us a little bit about your graduation, your PhD journey, and how you found it briefly.
Yeah, briefly. It was quite long, as you indicated in your introduction, but And it was quite a journey from kind of beginning to developing the dissertation project, and many great kind of stories, good and bad memories and bad memories, to be frank. But along the way, I've been able to meet really great scholars like Dr. Michael Kledios here, and it's really great to be done and start a new chapter.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations, and it's lovely to have you with us today. And Dr. Michael, welcome, and tell us a little bit about your interesting coffee mug. Mine says Coffee with Bishop Suriel with our logo, a podcast for all things Coptic. Tell us about your coffee mug and a little bit about your PhD journey.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sayedna. It's my sincere pleasure to be here. And I recently got this mug. It says PH done, with a short description of my dissertation on the back. My colleague in the Coptic Canadian History Project, Murray Phillips, sent it to me as a graduation present, and it's wonderful. I love the souvenir and the pun of PH done. And I think that sums up my PhD experience. Great friends and colleagues like Candace, like Marie, and many others who really inspire me, and I feel that we work towards a similar purpose to elevate the voice of Coptic Orthodox Christians all over the world. And for me, the PhD was a long commitment, as you know, Sayedna, and it's been 6 years of studying, researching all over Egypt and North America, and long days of writing in solitude. But throughout that whole process, my family and my friends have been my comfort, and it's something I feel truly blessed about, to have people around me that held me up throughout the whole process.
Well, certainly both of you have been a great inspiration, and I hope that you will encourage many more young Copts to think about continuing further study and research all the way to PhD. And I'm very interested today to hear what you have to say about this interesting topic that we will discuss together. So thanks to both of you for those introductions. So to start with, let me give you a little background about my two guests. Dr. Candace Lukasic is a postdoctoral research associate at the John C. Danforth Center on Religion and Politics at Washington University in St. Louis in Missouri. She earned her PhD in socio-cultural anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley, a place that I have visited a couple of years ago, and was the inaugural fellow in Coptic Orthodox Studies at the Orthodox Christian Studies Center at Fordham University, where I completed my PhD, so something very dear to my heart. Based on 15 months of ethnographic fieldwork between Egypt and the United States, her first book project explores the transnational circulation of political subjectivities and religious practices through the lens of Coptic Orthodox Christian immigration. Specifically, the project examines the geopolitical processes involved in the transformation of Middle Eastern Christians into modern-day martyrs and victims of Islamic terror by American religious and political actors, and investigates the effects those processes have on the Copts in Egypt and in the diaspora. For this project, she has received the Religion, Spirituality, and Democratic Renewal Fellowship for 2020 and 2021, funded by the Social Science Research Council and the FETSA Institute, as well as funding from the Louisville Institute, the Berkeley Center for the Study of Religion, the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and UC Berkeley's Institute for International Studies and Center for Middle Eastern Studies. She also holds a BA in Political Science and International Relations from Canisius College and the Master of Arts in Arab Studies from the Middle Eastern, South Asian, and African Studies Department of Columbia University. In addition to academic scholarship, she has written opinion editorials and short-form essays for Anthropology News, Public Orthodoxy, the Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy, and the Coptic Canadian History Project, CCHP, and is a curator for New Directions in the Anthropology of Christianity. Between 2019 and 2022, she will be a participant in Fordham University's Orthodox Christian Studies Center project on Orthodoxy and Human Rights, funded by the Henry R. Luce Initiative on Religion and International Affairs. That is quite an achievement, Candace, and I can only imagine what you will achieve in the next 10 years and beyond. Well done, and congratulations on this fine achievement. My second guest, Dr. Michael Akladios, is founder and project manager of the Coptic Canadian History Project, CCHP. The CCHP is a community archival and public history initiative affiliated with the Clara Thomas Archives and Special Collection at York University. Nominated for the Dean's Dissertation Prize, his research centers the Copts in modern Egyptian history and highlights their distinctiveness in relation to diverse immigrants arriving to Canada and the United States following the Second World War. He earned his PhD in history from York University, Toronto. His doctoral research was supported by several competitive scholarships, including the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council Doctoral Award and the A.V. Bennett Historica Canada Dissertation Scholarship. His first book project is entitled Ordinary Copts, Ecumenism, Activism, and Belonging in North American Cities, 1954 to 1992. In it, he argues that urban Copts integrated in Toronto, Montreal, and the New York and New Jersey area in two distinct ways, either choosing a two-way process of acculturation or cautious adaptation which best preserve their ethnic and religious particularity. Their settlement, social relations, and lay initiatives were a part of an adaptive process that drew on past experience in modern Egypt and the demands of their new environments. Michael has written editorials with Active History, Mada Masr, and Public Orthodoxy. His latest peer-reviewed article, Heteroglossia, Interpretation and the Experiences of Coptic Immigrants from Egypt in North America, 1955 to 1975, will be published in the November 2020 issue of Social History. Michael, I am honored that you are also with us today, and it is always a joy to see young scholars achieve such accolades that can be an inspiration to so many others out there. So welcome to both of you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about these two book projects and when you hope to publish and who they will be published through, if you have that information. Dr. Michael and Dr. Candace, if you can share that with us before we take a short break. Dr. Michael?
Well, I am currently revising my dissertation for publication, and I'm very excited to prepare proposals for several university presses, including the University of Toronto and the AUC, the American University in Cairo. Those are the two that I'm thinking about currently. And really the book is intended to give us an understanding of what migration meant to people leaving Egypt in the 50s and 60s, settling in Toronto and Montreal and the New York, New Jersey area. And it's really one of the few multipolar studies which takes 3 countries. Usually a lot of the comparative studies are focused on 2 countries. And so it's been a long time in the making. And I really hope that within the next 2 or 3 years, I'll be able to share it with everyone.
Well, we look forward to it. I'll tell you an interesting story. Is when my parents were thinking of migrating back in 1967. My father had applied to come to Canada because he was very close with his cousin who had migrated to Montreal. But the visa came for Australia first, and so they decided to go to Australia. And Candace?
Yeah, so over the next 2 years during my postdoc, I'll be revising my dissertation into a book. And I think very much kind of centering the book around Copts in American society, and also back and forth between Egypt and the United States. Part of my fieldwork was obviously in Upper Egypt, but also in the New York, New Jersey area. But as I've kind of revised a few pieces thus far over the summer, it seems that the American context is taking precedent. So for now, I'm revising over the next couple of years while I have this position at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm also considering a few academic presses in the United States, mainly possibly Princeton, Duke, Minnesota, and UC Press, but we shall see where the book turns towards.
Wonderful. We look forward to both of those 2 books, and I'm sure that they are going to be very interesting for many people to read. So congratulations, and keep working hard, and we look forward to seeing those 2 publications. So let us take a short break, and we'll be right back. So our conversation today rotates around Coptic immigration to the USA and Canada. Copts began immigrating to the US as early as the late 1940s. After 1952, the rate of Coptic immigration from Egypt to Canada and the United States increased. Immigration to Canada outpaced the US until the inauguration of more lenient procedures in 1965. In general, Coptic immigration rose steadily throughout North America, Europe, and Australia in the coming decades. We see a further influx of Copts to the US and Canada after the 2011 revolution in Egypt, fleeing instability and violence there. With hundreds of Coptic Orthodox churches in the United States alone, along with over 90 congregations in Canada. It is estimated that there are over 1 million Coptic Orthodox Christians in North America. While the Coptic Orthodox form a larger number in the US, the first Coptic Orthodox parish in North America was actually founded in Canada. In 1964, St. Mark's Parish in Toronto, Canada was established, and in fact, Father Moros, who is still at this parish, was the one who established the ministry there in Canada. However, not too long afterwards, the first parish in the States, St. Mark's, Jersey City, was founded in the late 1960s, and it is considered the first Coptic Orthodox church parish and church building in North America, if not the Western Hemisphere. In an anthropology news article, Dr. Lukasic states, ISIS's specific targeting of the Copts coincided with an increasing transnational interest in the plight of Christians globally. the Trump administration has focused policy on aiding persecuted Middle Eastern Christians, and the Copts have figured prominently in such initiatives, she says. No doubt, this was heightened after the burning of many churches after the revolution and the beheading of the 21 in Libya. Dr. Lukasic continues to say, many Americans, Coptic Americans included, have interpreted increased immigration to the United States a result of persecution in Egypt. Yet many Copts apply for the lottery because of both discrimination against them as a minority group and growing socio-economic precarity, particularly in Egypt's rural parts, end quote. Perhaps Dr. Lukasic can elaborate on which of these two factors dominate the decision of Copts to immigrate here. In a New York Times article in May of 1977, at the end of Pope Shenouda III's first visit to the United States, it tells us this. Like waves of earlier immigrants, they, the Copts that is, have encountered mixed blessings on these shores. Economic security accompanied by the perils of assimilation, end quote. And perhaps Dr. Claudius can speak to this issue of economic security versus the perils of assimilation, and how have the Copts fared in this arena. Coptic immigration has so many facets to it, and we obviously cannot cover everything in one episode, but we will discuss some important aspects today. So to start with, Candice, if you could start with some introductory brief comments and perhaps addressing the factors mentioned in your article.
Sure, absolutely. So I think that the juxtaposition between, kind of the push factors in Egypt and kind of the context by which Copts enter in the United States and Canada is particularly important here. And so from the Egyptian side of things, so my work focused on entrance into the green card lottery, as well as asylum seekers from Egypt, and those that come to the United States through family reunification visas. And so in terms of the green card lottery, and I worked in a village in Upper Egypt near Nega Hamedi, many folks that would come into these kind of church computer centers to enter into the green card lottery voiced both their concern about their position in Egyptian society as Christians, the kind of discriminations that they face. So for example, one father said that, he's applying the green card lottery every year because his son, for, somebody who is taking the kind of secondary exam that year, would be discriminated against if he went to medical school because of his last name, because of his name. And he said, I want a better life for my children in the United States because they won't be discriminated against because they're Christian. But at the same time, he also noted that there is less and less work for him, and he's making less and less money. So I don't think that there's one particular factor, and I also wouldn't say that fleeing is the particular term to use. I think that immigrating to the U.S. and elsewhere takes a lot of procedural power and patience as well. Applying to the green card lottery and asylum seeking, takes years sometimes. And so a lot of these forms of immigration to the U.S. are much more time-consuming, much more complicated than a single narrative that we can offer.
And do you think that with the immigration, is it more coming from Upper Egypt in the south, or more people from the north in Cairo and Alexandria and so on?
So for right now, I would say, given, at least from my research in the New York, New Jersey area, as well as in Los Angeles, and a very, very short trip to Nashville, Tennessee, I will say that the majority of migrants post 2011 have been from much more kind of smaller villages in Upper Egypt and in Egypt's rural parts more generally. And this became a particular issue in the New York, New Jersey area in different parishes, right, where they have immigrants mainly from Cairo, Alexandria, bigger cities, that then had to interface with folks from Egypt that they maybe never spoke with while they were there, or visited some of these villages, or even knew the names of some of these villages. I mean, in one of the parishes that I worked in, some of them would be like, I didn't even know this village existed. And so definitely a different geographic divide, as well as cultural divide, that has been experienced in different parishes throughout the United States since 2011.
Yeah, so that, would be some interesting dynamics that would be happening in some of these parishes across North America, and maybe some conflicts or clashes that may be happening because, north of Egypt and the south, almost two different worlds. So it'd be interesting, if some of this is going to come out in your research and in your books. But the other thing that I would think about there is, do you have any analysis of why more people have been accepted from the south rather than from the north of Egypt?
That's an incredibly important question, Saidna, and actually one that I encountered a number of times from folks both in the United States and in Egypt. And so kind of the assumption being, or what is made implicit by that question, is that there is kind of a targeting of particular groups of people, Coptic folks from Egypt's rural parts, and especially in Upper Egypt. And not only did I interview migrants, but I also spoke with embassy officials, folks that work on the green card lottery at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. And obviously their focus is really on the fact that this lottery is a lottery, it's random. And so if you think about it that way, there are more people from different areas of Egypt that are applying than in Cairo or Alexandria in terms of the proportion of the population, right? And so if an entire village is being entered into the green card lottery, there's going to be a higher proportion of folks that are chosen from that given village. I mean, I've heard a number of stories where, priests will, in different villages, will enter their entire congregation without them knowing into the lottery, and then they are chosen without having ever known that they had applied. So, there are stories like that.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for that. And Michael, I'm interested in your views about economic security versus the perils of assimilation for Copts after half a century of immigration.
Absolutely. That's a very intriguing and necessary question, Sayedna. I think I would want to look back at the historical trajectory and define these two concepts at the heart of the question. In looking at this issue of economic security and looking at the migrants who arrived in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s, really better job prospects, giving a chance to build security and to get married and to raise a family and provide for children opportunities to grow and be educated in new technologies and to build lives for themselves. That was a very important push factor, encouraging emigration out of Egypt. It was facilitated a lot of the times by the larger context, how Canada and Australia, especially in the 1950s, were pushing to get immigrants from Egypt. And this is not just Copts, but also including other minority groups, such as Jews, Armenians, Italians, and Greeks. This might interest you, Your Grace. It's a very fascinating little tidbit that came up in my research about how at the start of the Canadian immigration mission following the 1956 Suez Crisis, it was really competition from Australia that encouraged Canada to develop its first fully formed immigration program by the late 1950s. And the Canadian officials in the embassy in Cairo would often complain about how these Australians are going door to door and stealing the best qualified. And it was these kinds of contexts that the immigrants from Egypt were seen to be well educated, they were seen to be affluent, they were seen to provide a good source of capital cases or people with the necessary skills and money to come and benefit Canada and the United States. And so when these immigrants first arrived in the 1950s, many of them actually had no intention of settling permanently. Many of them arrived on J1 5-year visas for cultural exchange programs or to continue their education in graduate studies. And then things changed in Egypt. In the quasi-socialist turn in the early 1960s under Nasser, the nationalization of the Coptic hospital and Coptic schools, really it made sense to then stay in Canadian and US cities and build careers and return to marry and build families. Really the early churches and the early institutional development owes a great deal to the activities of His Grace Bishop Samuel, reposed to the Lord in October 1981. It was under his impetus that the first association, the Coptic Association of America, was formed, that brought together many Copts. It was through their work that Father Marcos came to North America and settled in Toronto, and also Father Robrail, who started St. Mark's Parish in New Jersey.
Yeah.
And so the economic motivations were definitely very prominent, and I think going into the early 80s, we see how prominent the economic motivations are to build economic stability and provide for family. At the same time, a lot of immigrants have to balance the fear of assimilation, the fear of losing what makes them unique and distinctive as they enter into these new environments and go to work and send their children to school and all of these things. But an interesting thing that came up in much of my research is that Copts did not become assimilated. In many ways, assimilation was a fear, but it was more a fear than a reality. This is because no immigrant group is one whole thing, complete in itself and unchanging. And no society is really easily capable of assimilating an entire ethnic group as if it was null and void of particularity. The Copts prize their ethnic and religious particularity. To just give an example and something that for me personally encapsulates this, Coptic immigrant and church activist Dr. Faik Ishak, former professor of English literature at Lakehead University.
Yes.
In a 1983 article published with Coptologia, an Ontario Coptic community journal, he wrote that, and I quote here, "The world in which the Coptic immigrants are living and the social milieu in which they are gradually incorporated are neither purely Coptic nor purely North American. Its roots are embedded in the ancient past, but its stems are budding in the new milieu. The old tradition keeps it lively, the new setting adds a fresh perspective, and the whole combination, or the whole complex structure, has its own uniqueness and attraction." End quote. And it's for these reasons that, although assimilation can be a prominent fear amongst immigrants, especially new arrivals, I, in my research, use the terms acculturation and adaptation because it's a two-way process where you are contributing as much as you are learning and integrating. And we can think of it in Egyptian terms. You don't get stuck in a one-way road. You have a two-way traffic. In that sense, I like to think of associations such as the Coptic Association of America, or even the Egyptian Canadian Club in Toronto, which created a place to celebrate their cultural traditions, listen to Arabic music, movies, and theatrical performances. And even the church, in time, as it expanded and there were new clergy and new buildings all over the continent, provided services for all age groups and created community institutions, vital institutions, to bring people together. And so I just want to end off with my favorite memory of when I came here with my parents as a young boy, of the St. Mark's Bazaar that's held annually in St. Mark's Church in Toronto, which is not only a celebration for Copts, but it's a way to outreach to the surrounding community and introduce them to what makes Copts distinctive. And I think that captures that dynamic much more than the perils of assimilation.
Yeah, that leaves a lot of food for thought, and another thing that we could talk about is how is marriage between young Copts in North America? Are they marrying within the Coptic community, or what percentages are marrying outside of the Coptic community? This week, Archbishop his name is very difficult to say, the Greek Archbishop of North America, was giving a lecture at Fordham University, and he said that now it is about 67% of Greek Orthodox people that are marrying what he's calling now ecumenical marriages. So it'll be interesting to see in the future, or it could be another episode all on its own about discussing marriage and how this may affect assimilation as well in North America. But let us now delve a little deeper in our conversation with some more interesting questions. So, can you talk a little bit about the generational differences in the United States and Canada? Anyone would like to begin?
I guess if it's okay, I can give a historical perspective and then Candace can take over. So I just want to start by, to follow up on the previous response, we had the initial wave of migrants coming to the US and Canada, and really the US until 1965, and especially in the later 60s, Egyptians were going to the US through connections to American industry and to academia. And so many of the early immigrants were were professional immigrants, were very educated, were quite invested in building churches and in the Sunday school movement before they emigrated. And in Canada, you had a lot more family immigrants arriving as families in Montreal and Toronto, which really were the two major centers in Canada throughout this early period. And as the community developed institutions and the immigration policies in Canada and the US began to become more lenient, we have a shift in the mid-1970s, especially following the Yom Kippur War and the increasing violence under Sadat and the economic precarity of many people, changing demographics slightly with more lower middle class, working class Copts and Muslim Egyptians emigrating to many North American cities. And really it was the community institutions that helped to bring people together. And these differences kind of continue and become somewhat problematic in creating divisions and tensions in the churches, especially around issues of economic power and language proficiency. But although there were divisions, one thing that I always kept coming back to in my research is how it never led to schism. And so when you look at other immigrant groups such as the Mennonites, and you look at the Ukrainians and other immigrants to Canada and the United States, often in the history of several Orthodox churches, and especially in American Catholicism, there's this issue of trusteeism, which is division caused by lay challenges to church boards and clerical authority. Yeah. And it leads to schism. But throughout the period that I study, up into the late 90s, although there are divisions based in class and in the timing of immigration, the experiences that they had in Egypt as the society became much more polarized along religious lines, we don't encounter that same thing with the Copts. We don't encounter schism. And that has always really been something that I found particularly intriguing, and something that I plan to pursue in a future project, looking at this issue of trusteeism and how it relates to the Coptic Orthodox Church. I'll leave it there, let Candace continue on to into the 90s.
Yeah, maybe before Candace begins, I think, there would have certainly been lots of teething problems at the beginning of Coptic immigration to North America, and maybe some of these people that were trustees or on boards had never been in such leadership positions before, and so they had very little experience, and this would have certainly caused issues. It'll be interesting to see further research that you might do on that, Michael. Candace? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I have a full chapter on that. I'd love to share it with you, Sayed.
Okay, wonderful. Candace.
Yeah, so, what's great about Michael and I is that we work on very complementary projects, and that, from the 1990s onwards, we see a different group of Copts, a different class of Copts, a different community of Copts from different, geographies of Egypt come to the United States, and that's through, in particular, the green card lottery, which was implemented in the early 90s, and really brings to the U.S. Folks from Upper Egypt, from Minya, from Asyut, from Nega Hamedi, and what that does is obviously it creates different, parish dynamics. And so this slowly started to kind of trickle into different parishes throughout the United States, in particular the New York, New Jersey area, which is where I did the majority of my field work. But also, the green card lottery also, allowed for the creation and the expansion of, for example, Nashville's Coptic community. Nashville's Coptic community was started because of a particular need for employment at the Grand Ole Opry Hotel. And a lot of those Copts came from Jersey City, who were seeking employment in the United States after they came through the green card lottery. And so there's a kind of a shift that, accumulates over time. And then the 2011 revolution happened, and folks continue to apply to the green card lottery, and folks continue to come to the U.S. But also we see a new group of people come to the U.S. and, for example, claim asylum as well. Not to say that there weren't asylum seekers prior to this period of time, but the post-2011 and particularly post-2013 asylum seekers are, kind of a different class of folks as well. And in my research, not only did I work with kind of folks who came on the green card lottery and were applying both in Upper Egypt and those that eventually came to the United States, particularly the New York, New Jersey area, but also I attended, asylum trials for Coptic asylum seekers, and really got to understand how the asylum system works in the U.S. For Copts. Many of the people that I worked with were mainly single men from all over Egypt, actually, but a lot from Upper Egypt. And one of the things that is not as well known is that, Coptic asylum seekers in the U.S. come from a variety of different geographies, not just in Egypt, but also come from the Gulf and other locations as well. And to apply for asylum, it requires a lot of funding for that too. So that's all to say that from the 1990s onwards, we see a different kind of class of Copts come to the United States, which creates particular conflicts in different parishes. I will mention this as my final comment to this question, is that post 2011, in a place like Jersey City, we see an enormous influx of folks from very rural parts of Upper Egypt, and in different parishes, this produced a lot of pressure on the life of the parish. So much so that in different parishes, there's different liturgies, some in English for the second generation, some in Arabic, and those are mainly folks from Cairo and Alexandria. And then you'll have another liturgy that is denoted as the children's liturgy, because a lot of these families that come from Upper Egypt have many children. And so you see kind of a spatial divide in the parish as well, that indicates kind of not only class divisions, but also cultural divisions. And this has produced conflict, but also cooperation in different parishes. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, well, I think what you just said, has made many of these parishes that have had this influx from various parts of Egypt to rethink a lot of their ministry and how they are serving all of these different groups with all of their different needs. And as you said, this would put a huge strain on these parishes, and also financial strain, because a lot of these people come, from poverty or, don't have a job yet. And so it's putting all these different pressures on our parishes all across North America, but obviously in particular regions like in Jersey City. You go into Jersey City and you think you're in Shobra or something like this, or one of the popular Coptic suburbs, or, I haven't been to Nashville, but I've heard so many things from Bishop Yusuf about the dynamics that are going on there. It's all very fascinating. So I think we have a couple of more questions that we want to go through briefly. How have American Copts spoken about the U.S. immigration debate? And can you describe this divide? Is it generational or is it based on class?
Yes, so again, I suppose I'll start with the history. In looking at the early Copts who arrived here in the 50s and 60s, we often see the role of the ecumenical movement, which was ascendant in the global 1960s, and how really Copts who arrived interacted with many Anglo-American and Anglo-Canadian Protestants and visited the churches and became very invested in outreach and teaching the surrounding society about their faith and culture. And they were received quite well because of that fervor for ecumenical relations and unity of services. And it was really that early interaction and that sense of belonging in a Christian North American environment that was quite formative in bringing Copts into this language around group recognition and this language around multiculturalism and contributions to the surrounding society. And in looking at the U.S. context, we can talk about the influence of the notion of the American dream and this idea of the by the bootstraps narrative of the immigrant bringing themselves to a new country and building their lives and finding success. And that formative period really has had a lot of influence in looking at how generational divides in North American parishes between the earlier arrivals and later arrivals, also between first generation and second generation, in how they speak about the immigration debate today. And it is, of course, generational, and it is also class in looking at how affluence and access to resources can insulate a family from interacting with a broader array of communities. And this brings me to something that I believe unites generation and class, in that when we look at this issue of finding commonalities and exposure to surrounding communities, which interaction tears down preconceived notions of difference, and it really helps you to understand the person that you meet every day. And coming back to Shobra, as Sayyidina said, when we look at Shobra and we see how Copts and Muslim Egyptians interact on the streets, and the kinds of memories that are shared when we speak of the history of Shobra, as opposed to areas in Egypt with either no or very little Coptic population, and how that sense of distance really affects relations between people of different faiths or different groups. And so in looking at these issues, generation and class matter, but also exposure, how much we are willing to interact with and create common bonds with diverse communities, and create an understanding of those around us, and really impact our own self-understanding in relation to those around us.
Thank you so much for that. Candace.
Yeah, I'll just briefly say that I think in terms of the U.S. immigration debate, I've heard a number of times from, different communities of Copts throughout the United States that, yes, the burden of, the quote unquote burden of the influx after 2011 really made them want to support reform of the green card lottery, or the elimination of the green card lottery. That's, one distinct thing I can say. But, I've encountered other moments, other interactions whereby you wouldn't necessarily think that a person of, for example, the working class would support immigration reform in terms of the fact that they came to the United States in the green card lottery and or asylum, etc. But at the same time, as Michael indicated before, Copts are not, a homogenous group, and they're quite diverse, not only generationally, class-wise, etc. One of the things that I would say vis-a-vis, thinking about, for example, Trump's Muslim ban, I've had a number of working class Copts who say that they support something like that, for example. And that would also affect, Coptic immigrants too. And so there's a lot of the ways that, when we think about the immigration debate, it's very ambiguous. Copts have varying different perspectives. And so I would say that that's one thing. But the other thing also being that the church in the U.S. has also tried to accommodate this kind of generational divide and really kind of think about their position within the immigration debate. And I'll leave with just, one example from the LA diocese, which I'm sure that you know quite well, Sid, after 2011, the creation of both, a diocesan head for social services and for education, theological education, Amba Abraham and Amba Carollos, indicates how the 2011 revolution has impacted upon the structure of the church too, and thinking about immigration to the United States.
Most definitely. We'll take a short break and we'll be back. We have one more question which is very dear to my heart. So my final question is about why or how has theological education become central to those among some in the second generation in the US and Canada? So any of you would like to tackle that question?
Yes. Candace, please.
Go. Well, I just want to say that so this particular question is close to my heart in that I'm very much engaged in the current movement for theological education in the Coptic Church in the United States, between the United States and Egypt. And one of the things I do want to say is that it's quite clear that while this is a movement that has occurred throughout the decades, especially after 2011, with the influx of new immigrants, we see that are challenging kind of local parish culture, but also kind of understandings of faith. We see a push for theological education in our churches, and also kind of a separation in many ways, thinking about the kind of American Coptic experience vis-a-vis kind of a traditional quote unquote ethnic parish. And one of the things I just wanted to point out within this push for theological education is also its connection to American Christianity writ large, and thinking about the push for evidence of your faith, apologetics, knowledge. One of the things that an interlocutor noted to me that is quite poignant is that in Egypt you're either a Mina or an Ahmed, right? But when you come to the United States, you have to actively believe. This is what they said: actively believe in your faith, and it's about faith vis-a-vis kind of versus an ethos of Coptic identity in Egypt. This person noted. So that kind of gives you an indication as to what the importance of theological education is for many in the second as well as first generation in the U.S.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. And Michael?
Yes, I want to approach this issue of theological education from the perspective of actually a long-running conversation in immigration studies. One might even say a debate of the concept of ethnic revival. And common among many immigrant groups, so here we can think of the Italians, Eastern European Jewish populations in Canada and the United States. There's a pattern of the second generation seeking a return to their roots. Mm-hmm. And this may take the form of a physical return or a keenness to explore the history and heritage of their culture and faith practices, or both. Approaching the turn to theological education from this perspective actually allows us to appreciate the broader significance and the immediacy for many people of this trajectory, and how it can provide young Copts not only knowledge and spiritual fulfillment, but also a sense of wholeness as their identity is forged over time in new environments.
Yeah, most definitely. I think also with the second generation, as you said, returning to their roots, but also a way of maintaining their identity. And maybe we'll speak a little bit more with Candace in a future episode about a little bit more about that. But thank you so much for both of you for these wonderful insights. And indeed, thank you to my two delightful guests, Dr. Candace Lukasic and Dr. Michael Akladios, for your insights on this important subject of Coptic immigration to the United States and Canada. I'm sure the discussion does not end here and will continue, and perhaps on another occasion we can look at some more aspects of this. As you can see, that this has been a fascinating discussion into Coptic immigration for the past half a century to the United States and Canada. Much has happened in the past 50 years, and no one would have imagined back in the 1960s where we are as a Coptic community today. I believe that deeper academic research is required to analyze this past period from many aspects, including religious, social, educational, economic, and general impact of Coptic immigration, if any, on American and Canadian society. Will the future generation of American and Canadian Copts have the same affinity to the Coptic Church of Egypt? Will they maintain Coptic identity, and how so? What matters are cultural and can be developed to suit the society we live in without compromising the faith. There are so many questions still unanswered, and I leave you to ponder upon. I ask you all to pray with me this week that the Lord Jesus Christ preserve His Coptic Church and her people in the United States and Canada, that they continue to keep the faith that was handed down once and for all to the apostles and delivered to us faithfully, that each generation in North America can continue the tradition and faith of the church and to teach it faithfully to their children. Until next week, stay safe and well, and be inspired by the Holy Spirit.
Be sure to tune in next week when His Grace will be joined again by Dr. Candace Lukasic to discuss Copts and race in America. Don't miss out on this stimulating conversation over a cup of coffee. To join the conversation, please visit our website, coffeewithbishopsuriel.org. After you listen, you can really help out by rating the show. Thank you for listening to Coffee with Bishop Suriel, a podcast for all things Coptic. To join the conversation, please visit our website, coffeewithbishopsuriel.org. And always remember, the best way to start any morning is with God and a cup of coffee.